She didn't just damage property. She wrecked the only thing my father needed to safely leave the house. And then she had the nerve to call it an accident. We had waited months to get the ramp built. Months of planning, approvals, permits, even fundraisers. My dad had been stuck inside ever since his surgery last year. Stairs weren't an option anymore. And I don't mean a little hard on the knees. I mean one wrong step and he's in the ER again. When the ramp was finally finished, it felt like we were getting a piece of life back. My dad could go outside again. He sat on the porch for hours that first week, watching birds, waving at neighbors, just soaking in the simple things. We even joked about putting a little flag at the top of the ramp like it was some kind of Freedom Hill. That ramp wasn't just a few planks of wood and some screws. It was independence. It was hope. So you can imagine how I felt when I heard the sickening crunch outside. I was inside helping Dad with lunch. The weather was perfect, and he was excited to go down the ramp and sit in the sun. I had just opened the fridge when the sound came, metal scraping, wood splintering, the unmistakable snap of something important breaking. I ran outside. There it was, my worst-case scenario. The ramp was split, one of the main supports cracked clean through. A car sat halfway over the edge of our driveway, the back bumper touching what used to be the bottom platform of the ramp. And of course, it was her. Karen. She was already out. Of the car, sunglasses on, hands on her hips like she was the one inconvenienced. My dad sat frozen in his wheelchair at the top of the stairs, staring at the wreckage like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. She didn't even look at him, just glanced at me and said, "Oops. Oops." That was all she had? She waved her hand like it wasn't a big deal. My car slipped out of gear. I was just turning around. No apology, no concern. Just excuses. I looked back at my dad. His mouth was slightly open, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And honestly, neither could I. This wasn't just someone backing into a trash can. This was the one thing standing between him and total isolation. And now it was mangled, sitting under the rear wheels of Karen's SUV. She acted like it was just a dent in a mailbox, but it wasn't. It was personal. My dad didn't say a word. He just wheeled himself back into the house, slowly, defeated. That moment hit me hard. The ramp gave him more than access. It gave him control. And now, that was gone again. Thanks to someone who couldn't be bothered to double-check her mirrors. And let me tell you, this wasn't the first time Karen had accidentally crossed a line. She was always too close to people's driveways. Always acting like the road belonged to her. HOA notices? She never followed them. But the board never called her out. Why? Because she was the president's cousin. Of course she was. I stood in the driveway and stared at the damage. The railing was split. One support post was leaning at a weird angle. You couldn't even use the ramp without risking it collapsing. Entirely. And every minute it stayed that way was another minute my dad was stuck inside. She looked at me like she was expecting me to say it was fine. Like I'd just smile and shrug and wave it off. Not a chance. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just stared. "You'll have to get that looked at," she said, gesturing at the ramp like it was a broken lawn chair. "Hope your insurance covers stuff like that." She got in her car and drove off like nothing had happened. And I just stood there, fists clenched, watching her taillights disappear down the street. Later that evening, I called around for repairs. The contractor who built the ramp said he could come out in a few days. Maybe. But he wasn't sure if it could be patched. It might need a full rebuild. And that wasn't cheap. Especially not when Karen already had a reputation for dodging blame. Kept picturing the way she looked at the ramp, like it was clutter. Like it was just some eyesore she didn't want to deal with in her neighborhood. But here's the thing. My dad didn't ask for pity. He didn't ask for sympathy. All he wanted was to enjoy the outdoors again without being treated like a burden. That ramp made it possible, and Karen, with her reckless parking and smug attitude, took that away like it was nothing. That night, I wheeled Dad to the window. He looked out at the broken ramp, silent. Then he looked at me. I could tell he was trying not to show how much it bothered him, but I could see it anyway. And I knew right then. I wasn't just going to fix the ramp, I was going to make sure Karen never forgot what she did. The next morning, I posted a photo of the damage in the neighborhood app. Not with commentary. Just the wreckage. Splintered wood, the tire marks streaked across the platform, and my dad staring at it from the top of the stairs. No hashtags, no rants. The comments started pouring in. People reacted. A few offered to help, but most silent. And guess who didn't say a word? Karen. Not even a message. Not even a fake apology. I wasn't surprised. She was the kind of person who made herself the victim no matter what. Her dog once dug up 3 yards in a single week. She said it was because people didn't mow properly. A kid's soccer ball landed in her garden. She called the cops. That's who we were dealing with. Later that afternoon, I caught her walking to her mailbox. She didn't even try to avoid me. In fact, she waved. "You postin' about that ramp thing?" she asked, as if it was some silly misunderstanding we'd laugh about over lemonade. I said nothing, just looked at her. She smiled like she was proud of herself. You know, the HOA might actually agree with me. That ramp's kind of a safety issue. Sticks out into the sidewalk a little, doesn't it? That's when it hit me. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even pretending it was an accident anymore. She wanted it gone, and now she was trying to flip the narrative, like the ramp was the problem, not her bumper. I clenched my jaw. It was approved. Permits, inspections, everything. She tilted her head and gave that smug half-shrug. Still, maybe it's a good time to rethink the design. These things can be temporary. Like my dad's disability was just an inconvenience that would pass. I walked away. I knew better than to give her a reaction. That's what she wanted. But inside, I was boiling. Not just because she damaged the ramp, but because she acted like my dad didn't matter. Like his needs didn't count because they weren't convenient for her daily routine. That night, I called the HOA, left a message. No response. The next day, I showed up at the clubhouse during their weekly meeting. I wasn't on the schedule, but I didn't care. I walked in, holding printed photos of the ramp and the damage. Karen was there, seated like a queen with her arms crossed. I laid the photos on the table. "This is what happens when people treat medical accommodations like they're optional," I said. A few board members looked uncomfortable. One man nodded quietly. But Karen? She looked bored, like she was already planning her grocery list. "I'd like the board to formally document this incident," I continued. "And I'd like a statement of responsibility from the homeowner involved." Karen chuckled. "Maybe you should file it with your homeowner's insurance instead," she said. "You're acting like I hit a person." I turned toward her. "You hit his access to the world. That ramp was the only way he could leave the house safely." Another board member finally spoke up. "Well, if there was an accident on private property, we can't technically get involved unless there's legal liability." Karen jumped on that. "Exactly. It's a civil matter, not an HOA issue. A civil matter. Like this wasn't about community. Like this wasn't about a disabled man's ability to exist in his own home." I left the clubhouse that evening with no help, no support, and no accountability. The HOA had once again shrugged off anything involving Karen. Probably, afraid she'd stir up more trouble if they sided against her. Back at home, I broke the news to my dad. He didn't say much, just nodded and turned his eyes back toward the window. The ramp was still broken, still useless, still a daily reminder of how easily people can take away what little freedom he had left. The repair crew wasn't coming for another 3 days. I set up a temporary set of plywood boards over the damaged section, but it wasn't secure. He couldn't use it. Not safely. So we stayed inside. That weekend, our neighbor across the street, Mr. Thompson, came over. He was in his 70s and had watched the whole thing from his porch. He said, "I've lived here 25 years. I've seen HOA nonsense. But this is different." He offered to help. So did his son. And before I knew it, 3 more neighbors showed up, people I barely knew. They helped clean up the debris and reinforce the boards, enough for my dad to at least roll out onto the porch again. It wasn't the same, but it was something. Karen drove by twice while we were working, slowly, staring. She didn't wave this time. And that's when I knew. She didn't care about the ramp. She didn't care about the neighborhood. She cared about control. And the moment someone's needs didn't fit her picture of a perfect community, she found a way to shove them out of sight. But she made a mistake. Because she thought we'd just take it. She thought we'd accept it like everyone else had. Quietly, politely, without a fight. She was wrong. The ramp would be fixed. But first, I had a little plan. Not revenge. Just a reminder, something that would stick in her mind every time she looked out her window. Because if she wasn't going to care about how her actions affected others, I'd make sure she couldn't forget. Petty wasn't usually my style, but this wasn't about being childish. This was about sending a message. Karen thought she could damage our ramp, laugh it off, and walk away like she hadn't just shut someone back inside their own home. She thought people like my dad didn't matter because we didn't raise our voices, because we didn't fight dirty. But she forgot one thing. I had time, motivation, and a toolbox. The ramp repair was scheduled for Monday. It would cost more than we had budgeted, but my aunt chipped in and my cousin set up a donation page that surprisingly got a few generous hits. It would take another week or two for the full rebuild, but I wasn't going to wait that long to remind Karen who she messed with. So that weekend, I started crafting my plan. It began with a sign, a massive, bright yellow yard sign, placed right in front of the broken ramp for everyone to see. Caution. Obstacle created by reckless driver. See Karen at number 42 for details. No names. No profanity. Nothing actionable. Just facts. Within hours, phones were buzzing. Neighbors slowed down when they walked by. Some stopped and stared. A few took pictures. Karen's curtains twitched at least 5 times that day. I made sure the sign stayed perfectly upright, angled for the best visibility from her front window. And then came phase 2. See, Karen loved one thing more than her status. Her lawn. She was obsessed with it. Trimmed the edges twice a week. Sprayed the weeds like they owed her money. She even measured grass height with a ruler once. That's not a joke. The HOA newsletter once used her lawn as a photo example of community excellence. So I made a new project, a community garden, right at the edge of my lawn, closest to hers. It wasn't illegal. I'd checked. And I made sure it followed every guideline in the HOA booklet down to the last word. I even had approval from 2 board members who were secretly sick of Karen too. The garden wasn't ugly, but it was loud. Bright painted pots, wind chimes, a solar flamingo that lit up at night. The kind of cheerful chaos Karen hated with her whole soul. When she saw me planting marigolds in a polka dot bucket with gnomes on either side, she walked out with her arms crossed. "You know there's a setback line," she said, not even bothering. With small talk. "There is," I said calmly. "It's 12 inches. This is 14. Measured it twice." She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked away like the HOA police were about to swoop down from the sky and save her. Spoiler, they didn't. But it didn't stop there. On Sunday afternoon, I rolled out the final phase, my dad. He hadn't been outside in nearly 2 weeks. But I helped him down the temporary boards we'd secured and wheeled him onto the porch. He sat wrapped in a blanket with his sunglasses on, watching the wind spin a row of colorful pinwheels I'd lined up along the new garden bed, and taped to his wheelchair, a laminated sign. "I used to have a ramp until Karen backed into it." He didn't say much, didn't need to, just sat there calmly while Karen paced her yard pretending not to see us. But everyone else saw him. Joggers, dog walkers, kids, on bikes. Neighbors I'd never spoken to suddenly waved and dropped off snacks, cards, even a new birdhouse. A few whispered that they were glad someone was finally standing up to her. Karen didn't speak to me for days. She just watched, stewing. Then on Tuesday, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from the HOA board, a formal complaint against me. The wording was ridiculous. It said my signs were disruptive, my garden was not in keeping with the aesthetic values of the community, and my outdoor decor created tension among neighbors. I laughed out loud. Karen had finally made her move, but she'd made it too late, because I'd already filed my documentation. I had photos, timestamps, witness statements, and a copy of the police report I filed about the incident. even though Karen claimed it was a non-issue. The officer didn't charge her with anything, but the report was official. It said, property damage. And it listed her name. So I emailed the board, attached everything, and said, please let me know when the formal complaint against the person who drove onto my property and destroyed a disability ramp will be issued. I'd be happy to attend the next meeting. I didn't get a reply, but 2 days later, I got something better. An email from one of the quieter board members. She thanked me for bringing the issue forward. She said she was deeply sorry for how it was handled, and she let me know, off the record, that Karen had been told to drop it or risk losing her voting privileges on the board. That's when I knew. I had won. Not in a big dramatic way. Not with yelling or lawsuits or public fights, but with facts, with signs, with flowers, flamingos, and patience. And when the new ramp was finally installed, wider, stronger, reinforced, I held a little ramp warming party. Just a few chairs, cookies, and music. My dad got to roll down the new platform on his own, smiling like he'd just won the lottery. Karen never showed her face that day, but I saw her curtains move. She was watching. Of course she was. And now, every time she pulls into her driveway, she sees the garden. The sign's gone, but the pinwheels stayed. So did the gnomes, so did the solar flamingo. She can't erase what she did, and she can't ignore that someone stood up to her. And that's the beauty of petty. Done right, it's unforgettable.